Hi, my name is Therea Roberts, and today I'm going to talk about the structure of the heart. So that's why I've got these lovely red blood cells as my background, because red blood cells are a major component of the cardiovascular system, and they travel all through the vessels that I'm going to talk about as well. So I'm going to share my screen and I'll talk about the different structures of the heart as we go. I'll label the diagram and hopefully it will help further your learning about the heart structure. So first of all, when we are looking at a diagram of the heart, or any diagram in anatomy for that point, it's as if you're facing the person. So just to keep us right, I'll write at the top of the whiteboard here, this is actually the left-hand side of the heart, and this is the right-hand side of the heart. So it's as if I'm facing this person face on. So first of all, I want to talk about the chambers. So the chambers of the heart, we have two atria at the top of the heart and two ventricles. So if you were to think about the heart like split into four, here's a diagram of the heart, we have two atria and two ventricles. 1, 2 atria, 3, 4 ventricles, 4 chambers in total. So the right atria, or atrium if we're talking about just one, atrium for one and atria for plural. So this is the right atrium here, and then the right ventricle down here. Then we have the left atrium up here and the left ventricle down here. So the right and left hand side of the heart are separated by what we call the cardiac septum. This area here is the cardiac septum. And just like in our nose, we have a nasal septum to separate our nostrils. We have a cardiac septum to separate the right and left-hand side of the heart. Down here, this pointy bit is what we call the apex of the heart. And we also have valves within the heart. That's the bit I'm going to talk about next. So hopefully we're okay with the chambers of the heart, the two atria and the two ventricles. I'll just take this all away and then we'll talk about the valves next. So valves are found within the heart, and valves are really important in the fact that they prevent backflow of blood and ensure that blood only travels in one direction to keep everything flowing the way it should within the body. So we have 4 main valves I want to talk about within the heart. So these 2 valves we're going to talk about first, over here on the right-hand side of the heart and on the left-hand side of the heart. These 2 valves collectively are referred to as the atrioventricular valves. Atria, that bit comes because they're between the atria, and the ventricular because they're between the atria and the ventricles. So for short, we usually refer to them as the AV valves. AV valves for short, instead of saying atrioventricular valves. That's kind of easy to remember thinking about the fact of where those valves are situated within the heart. But if you're doing any further reading or research or watching other YouTube videos as part of your learning, then you will find that the right-hand side of the heart, this valve here, this atrioventricular valve, also gets referred to as the tricuspid valve. Tricuspid valve. Tri means 3, and the cuspid is to do with cusps. It has 3 cusps. So if you were to look down on this valve, it would kind of look like this, with 3 cusps. On the left-hand side of the heart, this AV valve also gets referred to as the bicuspid valve. Bi means 2, and then we've got 2 cusps. Annoyingly, there is a third name for this valve on the left-hand side, which is referred to as the mitral valve. So these valves are held by sort of tendons. They're like heartstrings, is probably the way you've heard of them, and maybe in songs when you hear like pulling on my heartstrings, things like that. The correct word, the Latin term for these tendinous cords, is cordae tendineae. I'm sure it's EAE. So that's the correct word for these tendinous cords. These cords are there and they help, these tendons, they kind of help hold the valves in place. So we have sort of papillary muscles as well, helping to hold the valves in position. And those valves are shaped, they're sort of pointing downwards. So they're kind of pointing downwards so that when blood flows into the top two chambers, the atria, then blood will sort of naturally flow downwards because of the way the valves are positioned within the heart. So the cords, the tendinous cords, help make sure they're held in position the way that they should be, and there's no overextension or sort of inversion or anything of these valves. So that's the two main valves I wanted to talk about. There's another two main valves I want to talk about. So let me just take this all away. These valves also have different names. I took away that right bit, didn't I? Let's keep that there to keep ourselves right. So this valve here is referred to as the pulmonary valve. Pulmonary valve. Now, pulmonary always refers to the lungs. It's called the pulmonary valve because it's taking blood towards the lungs, towards the lungs is what I'm supposed to say. So this pulmonary valve, it's situated, but it's kind of in the opposite direction from the AV valve. So these valves are sort of pointing up the way rather than downwards like the AV valves were. So they're situated up the way so that when the ventricle contracts, the blood is pushed and the valves just naturally open to allow the blood to enter into the pulmonary valve, and then it will make its way to the lungs. So like I said, pulmonary refers to the lungs, and this valve is leading out to the pulmonary arteries. So we have a left and right pulmonary artery leading to both lungs to pick up oxygen and then bring it back into the heart. This other valve you can't see, but it's kind of just to the right of the valve here. This one is referred to as the aortic valve. And why the aortic valve? Because it's leading out into the aorta, the largest artery in the body. So the aorta is this large, sort of curved artery here. Let me just change that colour back. So if you're doing further reading, you might also see these valves referred to as semilunar valves. Semilunar valves. Or SL valves for short, SL valves. So both of these valves, the pulmonary and aortic valve, collectively get referred to as the semilunar valves. Why semilunar? Because they're shaped like half moons. That's where it gets its name from. So 4 valves in total: the atrioventricular valves, or the tricuspid and bicuspid or mitral valve, and then we have the pulmonary valve and aortic valve, or collectively referred to as the semilunar valves. So let me just take that out. So it's good practice if you're trying to learn the structure of the heart. It's good practice if you yourself get unlabeled diagrams of the heart and try to label them just repeatedly. Repetition is the key to learning. So just repeat yourself. Try and fill it in without looking, and then compare your answers with a real diagram of the heart, and then just keep trying again and again. You only learn through repetition, unless you're a genius, which I am not. So that is our chambers of the heart, and that is the valves of the heart. So remember, valves, they're always there to prevent backflow of blood and ensure blood only travels in one direction. The last part I want to talk about regarding the structure of the heart is the vessels that are leading into and branching off from the heart. So we'll start over here. This vessel here is called the superior vena cava. I'll just write that out, superior vena cava. So vena just means vein. And down here, we have a vessel leading into the same place. Both these vessels are leading into the right atrium. So this is the inferior vena cava. So the superior vena cava at the top is bringing deoxygenated blood back from the head and upper limbs back into the heart, whereas the inferior vena cava is bringing blood back from the feet and calves and lower limbs back into the heart. So that's why they're referred to as superior and inferior in this case. Other vessels are the pulmonary veins. So we have 4. You might see some diagrams with only 2 pulmonary veins, and some diagrams only have 1. They try and simplify the heart diagram. But in real life, we have 4 pulmonary veins leading into the heart. So we've got 1 here, 2, 3, 4. So these are referred to as the pulmonary veins. Pulmonary, again, because they're coming back from the lungs. I've mentioned already the aorta, the largest artery in the body, aorta, and then we have the pulmonary arteries. So you can see it leading into the left lung here. This is the pulmonary artery. And then here's the other one leading into the right lung. That is another pulmonary artery, a branch of the pulmonary artery leading to the lungs. So that is all the vessels, the valves, and the chambers within the heart. The last little bit I want to talk about is blood flow through the heart. So let me just take this away. So I always like to think about blood flow through the heart as if the blood's already given off, the red blood cells have already given away their oxygen to the respiring cells and tissues. So I keep rubbing out that left and right. 1 second. Left. So thinking about red blood cells, their whole job is to pick up oxygen in the lungs and take it to wherever it's needed in the body. So we need oxygen for respiration, cellular respiration to take place. So thinking about the blood that's already given away all its oxygen, it needs to come back into the heart. What is the heart's job? The heart, without the heart, blood would just remain static and still, it wouldn't move. So the heart is actually this muscular pump, pumping blood all around the system. So blood travels all the way through the system twice. We have a systemic circulation, where the blood is traveling all around your system. And then we have the pulmonary circulation, where blood is only traveling to the lungs and back to the heart again. And this is because we need that extra force to get the blood all around the system once oxygen has been picked up in the lungs. So thinking about deoxygenated blood, which is usually depicted in blue. So you see how you can see this blue color here, and we've got red over here. Blue refers to deoxygenated blood. That means the red blood cells have already given away all their oxygen and they're coming back to the heart to be pushed to the lungs to pick up more. So deoxygenated blood comes back into the heart via the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava into the right atrium. So this is deoxygenated just now. Deoxygenated, I'll put RBC, red blood cells for short. So then, naturally, because of the way that the AV valve is positioned, the blood, about 2/3 will naturally run through into the right ventricle. And then for that last bit of blood to be pushed through into the ventricle, the atria contracts down the way, and the blood is pushed into the right ventricle, and the AV valve or tricuspid valve will snap shut. Next, where does the blood want to go? It wants to go to the lungs to pick up oxygen. So the ventricle, the right ventricle, will contract sort of upwards to push the blood out through the pulmonary valve and through the pulmonary arteries towards the lungs to pick up oxygen. So that's its first job. It's coming back to the heart to be pushed to the lungs. Then the blood needs to come back into the heart again. So it doesn't have enough push or enough energy to get all around the system just from the lungs. It has to come back into the heart to use that heart as the muscular pump needed to push blood all around the system. So the blood comes back into the heart via these pulmonary veins. So remember I said we've got 4 pulmonary veins. blood comes back from the left and right lungs into the left atria, and then 2/3 will naturally pass through into the left ventricle down here, and then that left atria will contract downwards to push the remaining blood all into the left ventricle. So now the blood is all within this chamber here, and this left ventricle will contract up the way to push the blood out through the aortic valve and into the aorta, the largest artery in the body, and all around the systemic circulation, all around the system, to give off that freshly oxygenated blood. So now we refer to the red blood cells as oxygenized, and they're referred to as oxyhemoglobin. So within red blood cells, we have millions of hemoglobin molecules, little pigments that kind of hold the oxygen. And so we refer to the hemoglobin as oxyhemoglobin because it has oxygen attached now. So in real life, the blood that has oxygen attached is bright red in colour, and deoxygenated blood that's already given away its oxygen to the respiring cells and tissues is a sort of dark red in colour. It's not blue, even though in diagrams it's depicted as blue, deoxygenated blood, and our veins look blue. That's just due to connective tissue. If we were to cut our veins open that look blue, the blood would be red. So in real life, deoxygenated blood is just a darker red, and oxygenated blood is a sort of bright red. So the purpose of the heart is the fact that it's helping push blood all around the system. Without this muscular pump, nothing would happen. Blood would remain static. It would pool together, and we would die, basically, because we wouldn't be able to carry out cellular respiration and get oxygen where it needs to go. So I just want to point out before I finish off this video, you can see this muscular layer here. I'm going to kind of draw around it. See this thick muscular layer? You can notice that on the left-hand side of the heart, it's much, much thicker than it is here on the right-hand side of the heart. This thick muscular layer within the ventricles. So this layer is actually the myocardium. Myocardium. Myo meaning muscle, and cardium because we're talking about the heart. It's thicker here because muscular contraction, it needs to be stronger. Why does it need to be stronger in the left-hand side of the heart? Because the left-hand side of the heart is responsible for pushing blood all around the body, whereas the right-hand side of the heart doesn't need, it just needs a thinner layer of myocardium, because when it contracts that ventricle, it's only pushing the blood to the lungs. Now think about where the heart is in the center of your body, and slightly the apex is pointing slightly to the left-hand side. Your heart is in the center, and so are your lungs. It's not having to go very far. It's not having to travel very far. So that's why the left-hand side is much, much thicker in its muscular layer than the right-hand side of the heart. So the heart has several layers within it. I might talk about the layers of the heart in a further video, but the myocardium is, you can think about the myocardium being the sort of middle layer, and you can think M for middle. It's the middle layer of the heart. The very, very outside of the heart is protected by this fibrous pericardium, this fibrous sort of tissue, which sort of holds the heart and makes sure it doesn't overextend or overexpand, as well as protecting the heart. But the myocardium is really important because of that thick muscular layer getting the blood all around the system. I'll talk about the different layers of the heart in future videos. I'm also going to talk about what makes up blood. So people think about blood as just being red blood cells, and some people remember that there's white blood cells and platelets and plasma too, but there's many, many, many more nutrients traveling around your blood as well. So we'll talk about that in future videos.